the silence in my house was a living thing. It had weight and texture, settling over the floral patterns of the armchairs and clinging to the heavy damask curtains my late husband, Arthur, had insisted upon. For 7 years since his passing, that silence had been my most constant companion, a quiet, mournful entity that I had learned to accommodate. It was a stark contrast to the life we had built within these walls, a life filled with the boisterous laughter of our only son, Jem, the scent of baking bread, and the comfortable rhythm of two people who knew each other's souls. Now, at 73, the silence often felt less like peace and more like an accusation, a reminder of all that was gone. My home, a sprawling 2-story colonial in the quieter part of Charleston, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a museum dedicated to a life I no longer lived. Jim and his wife, Lauren, lived 3 states away, a distance that felt both geographical and emotional. They were busy, they always said, with their careers, their friends, their vibrant social lives. I understood, or at least I told myself I did. But a mother's heart has its own logic, its own desperate gravity, and mine pulled relentlessly toward my son. To keep that connection from fraying into nothing, I had made an offer years ago, one born of loneliness and a yearning to feel needed. Use the house whenever you like, I had told them, picturing cozy family gatherings, perhaps even the future patter of grandchildren's feet on the polished hardwood floors. It's too big for just me. Bring your friends, have your parties. Just let me know when. They took me at my word, and then some. My home became their weekend getaway, a free-of-charge party venue. They would descend with a carload of friends, their laughter echoing through the halls for 2 days straight. In those moments, the silence was banished, replaced by the thumping bass of music I didn't recognize and the clinking of wine glasses. I would confine myself to my upstairs bedroom, listening to the sounds of a life I wasn't part of, telling myself that the proximity to my son was enough. I would pretend their presence was a comfort, that the noise was a form of company. I was the silent, benevolent proprietor of a hotel for strangers, a ghost in my own home. But the aftermath was always the same. They would leave on a Sunday evening with breezy thank yous and promises to call, leaving behind a battlefield of sticky countertops, wine-stained carpets, and overflowing trash bins. I would spend the next 2 days scrubbing, polishing, and airing out the lingering scent of stale champagne and perfume, my aging back aching with the effort. Each time, I found a new piece of damage, a cigarette burn on the porch railing, a deep scratch on the dining room table, a broken piece of the porcelain dinnerware that had been my mother's. I never said a word. The cost of cleaning up their chaos seemed a small price to pay to have my son under my roof, even if he barely spoke to me while he was there. It was a transaction I had accepted, my home and my labor in exchange for the illusion of family. Lauren, in particular, treated the arrangement with a breathtaking sense of entitlement. She was a woman sculpted from sharp angles and cold ambition, her smile a beautiful, practiced thing that never quite reached her eyes. She would sweep into my kitchen, rearrange my pantry to her liking, and speak to me with a cloying sweetness that felt more like a command than a kindness. "Ruth, darling, we're out of olives. Could you be a dear and run to the store?" she would ask, not waiting for an answer before turning back to her friends. Jim, my Jim, would stand by, offering a weak, apologetic smile that did nothing to soften the sting of her dismissal. He was a shadow of the boy I had raised, a man who seemed to have misplaced his spine somewhere along the path to adulthood. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning after a particularly raucous weekend. I had found a half-empty bottle of expensive whiskey, one of Arthur's last and most prized possessions, left uncapped on the kitchen counter. Beside it, a sticky ring had permanently marred the antique cherrywood. Something inside me, a part of my spirit that I thought had long since withered away, snapped. It was more than just a bottle. It was a desecration of a memory. It was the final, careless act of disrespect that I could no longer ignore. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone and called Jim. My voice, when it came out, was steadier than I expected. "Jim," I said, forgoing any pleasantries. "The parties have to stop. I can't do this anymore. The house is not a rental property. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sputtering attempt at an apology that quickly morphed into defensiveness. Mom, we're careful. It's just a bit of fun, but I held firm. For the first time in years, I did not yield. I explained the damage, the exhaustion, the feeling of being an unpaid housekeeper in my own home. The conversation ended stiffly with a clipped "Fine, Mom," from Jim that felt more like a threat than an agreement. A month passed in blessed, uninterrupted silence. I began to reclaim my home, to enjoy the quiet I had once resented. I spent my afternoons in the garden, tending to my roses, and my evenings reading in the armchair where Arthur used to sit. My neighbor, Martha, a sharp-witted widow with a no-nonsense attitude, noticed the change in me. "You've got a spring in your step, Ruth," she commented one afternoon over the fence. "Finally put your foot down with those two, did you?" I simply smiled, feeling a flicker of pride. The peace was shattered on a Saturday afternoon. I was in my garden when I saw the cars begin to arrive, one after another, lining my quiet street. My heart sank. A parade of stylishly dressed strangers, none of whom I recognized, began walking up my driveway, carrying bottles of wine and gift bags. They walked past me without a second glance, as if I were part of the landscaping, and went straight through my front door, which I now saw was propped open. The familiar, sickening thud of dance music started to pulse from within my own living room. Confusion warred with a cold, rising dread. Jim and Lauren hadn't called. They hadn't asked. They had simply decided that my boundaries, my wishes, my home, were irrelevant. For a long while, I stood frozen among my rose bushes, the dirt still clinging to my gardening gloves. Humiliation washed over me, hot and prickly. They were doing this to punish me, to show me that I had no real power, that my home was theirs to command whenever they pleased. I thought about staying outside, hiding in my own backyard until they left. I thought about calling the police. But then, a different feeling began to surface, a stubborn spark of defiance. This was my house. Arthur and I had built it. Every brick, every floorboard held a piece of our history. I would not be driven out. Taking a deep breath, I pulled off my gloves, smoothed down my apron, and walked toward my own front door. The scene inside was surreal. My living room was packed with people, their chatter and laughter a deafening roar. My furniture had been pushed against the walls to create a dance floor. A stranger was acting as a bartender behind a makeshift bar set up on my dining room table. I saw Lauren holding court in the center of the room, looking radiant in a shimmering cocktail dress, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She was celebrating her victory over the foolish old woman who had dared to say no. I scanned the crowd for Jim, but couldn't see him. I started to push my way through the sea of bodies, my heart pounding against my ribs. I needed to find my son. I needed him to look me in the eye and explain this. A few people glanced at me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disdain. I was an old woman in a faded house dress and an apron, a relic from another era who had stumbled into their glamorous affair. Finally, I reached the center of the room and stood before my daughter-in-law. "Lauren," I said, my voice barely a whisper above the din. "What is all this?" She turned to me, her smile widening into a predatory grin. She took a deliberate sip of her champagne, her eyes glittering with malice as she looked me up and down, taking in my simple clothes, my work-worn hands. She leaned in close, her voice a poisonous whisper meant only for me, yet somehow it felt as though the entire room could hear it. "Oh, Ruth, I'm so sorry. There must have been a misunderstanding then." She straightened up, raised her voice so the people nearest to us could hear, and delivered the blow. "You weren't even invited." The words landed like stones, heavy and brutal. A ripple of gasps and titters spread through the small circle around us. Time seemed to slow down, the music fading into a dull, distant throb. I looked at the faces of the strangers surrounding me, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They were witnesses to my utter and complete humiliation. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold numbness spreading through my limbs. In my own home, She had said this to me in my own home, the home my husband had built for us, the home where I had raised her husband. Lauren's expression was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had wanted to hurt me, to put me in my place, and she had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. She then gestured toward the door with her champagne flute, a gesture of dismissal one might give to a clumsy servant. "Perhaps it's best if you go upstairs," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You look a little tired. We wouldn't want you to be uncomfortable. It was an order, not a suggestion." She was kicking me out. Not just from the party, but from my own life, my own space. I saw Jim then, standing near the fireplace, talking to another couple. He had seen the whole exchange. Our eyes met for a fleeting second, and in that moment, I saw not anger or defiance, but shame. He looked away instantly, turning his back to me, pretending he hadn't seen, hadn't heard. And that was the cruelest cut of all. His silence was his complicity. His inaction was his consent. He chose her. He chose this. He let her eviscerate his own mother in a room full of strangers, and he did nothing. I didn't go upstairs. I turned and walked, my back ramrod straight, through the crowd that parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked out my front door, across my own lawn, and straight to Martha's house next door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound of their laughter followed me all the way. Martha opened the door before I even knocked, her face a mask of worry. She had seen the cars, heard the music. She took one look at my ashen face and pulled me inside, wrapping her arms around me as the first sob finally tore its way out of my chest. I cried for my lost husband, for my lost son, and for the woman I used to be, the one who believed that love and sacrifice would be enough. The aftermath of the party was a new, colder kind of silence. The house was cleaned not by me, but by a professional service Lauren had apparently hired, a final, condescending twist of the knife. They left no mess, only a sterile, impersonal emptiness. A week later, Lauren called. Her voice was back to its syrupy sweet tone, as if the incident had never happened. "Ruth, darling, I hope we didn't upset you," she began, the insincerity so thick I could barely breathe. "It was all just a big misunderstanding," I said nothing. I just listened as she spun her web. Then came the real purpose of the call. "You know, things have been so stressful for Jim and me lately," she purred. "Work is just a nightmare, and honestly, I've been thinking, I'm not sure I can handle it all. The pressure is immense. I've even thought about leaving, just getting away from it all." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. Leave it all. Leave him. She knew my greatest fear was losing Jim entirely, of being left utterly alone. She was twisting the knife she had so expertly planted in my back. "A little financial cushion would make things so much easier," she continued, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Just to take the pressure off. Say, $5,000 a month? It would really help me feel more secure. For Jim's sake, of course. We want him to be happy, don't we?" It was blackmail, pure and simple. It was extortion wrapped in the guise of marital concern. I felt a wave of nausea. She was demanding I pay her to stay married to my son. The audacity of it was breathtaking. My first instinct was to scream, to curse her, to tell her what a vile, manipulative creature she was. But the fight had gone out of me. The humiliation at the party had hollowed me out, leaving behind a fragile, frightened shell. The thought of Jim, alone and abandoned because I was too proud to pay, was more than I could bear. So, with a voice that was not my own, I heard myself agree. "Okay, Lauren," I whispered. For Jim, the sound of her triumphant little sigh was the most sickening sound I had ever heard. For 6 months, I made the transfer. Every first of the month, I would sit at my computer, my hands trembling, and send a piece of my security, a piece of my dignity, into her bank account. Each transaction felt like a fresh wound. I stopped tending my garden. I stopped having tea with Martha. I barely left the house. The silence I had once begun to enjoy was now suffocating, filled with the ghosts of my own weakness and shame. I was paying a monster to live with my son, and I despised myself for it. Jim called occasionally, his conversations stilted and brief. He never mentioned the money. He never mentioned the party. He spoke of work, of the weather, of anything and everything that did not matter, his voice carrying a strange cheerfulness that was more painful than silence. He was a stranger to me now, a man I was paying to keep. The awakening came on a rainy afternoon in October. Jim and Lauren were visiting, a rare occurrence. They were staying for the weekend, and Lauren had insisted on borrowing my car to run some errands. I was in the kitchen, staring blankly out the window at the rain-soaked garden, when I heard Jim's voice from the living room. He was on the phone, and he must have thought I was upstairs. His voice was low, but the house was so quiet that his words carried clearly. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing," he said, and I heard him chuckle. It was a low, conspiratorial sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. "She just transfers the money, every month, like clockwork. Honestly, it's almost too easy. Lauren, you were a genius. Threatening to leave me? That was the perfect touch. She'd do anything to keep her precious boy from being all alone." My blood ran cold. I pressed myself flat against the kitchen wall, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. He kept talking, his words weaving a tapestry of such profound betrayal that I felt my world tilt on its axis. "Yeah, the down payment on the lake house is almost covered. A few more months of the mommy fund, and we'll be all set. She can sit in this dusty old mausoleum by herself, and we'll be sipping cocktails by the water." He laughed again, a sound full of smug satisfaction. "Don't worry, babe. I'm playing my part. I call her, I sound sad, I sound stressed. She eats it up. She thinks she's saving our marriage. I didn't hear any more. I couldn't. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold linoleum floor, my arms wrapped around my knees. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it impossible to breathe. It wasn't just Lauren. It was him. My son. My Jim. He wasn't a bystander. He wasn't a weak-willed husband manipulated by a cruel wife. He was the architect of my pain. He was a co-conspirator in his own mother's extortion. The party, the humiliation, the monthly payments, it had all been a deliberate, calculated strategy to bleed me dry. The boy I had raised, the one who skinned his knees and cried in my arms, the one I had taught to be kind and honest, was gone. In his place was this cold, greedy stranger who called his childhood home a mausoleum and spoke of his mother with such casual contempt. The pain was so immense, so absolute, that it transcended tears. It was a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. I sat on that floor for what felt like hours, the rain beating against the window pane, and I felt something inside me shift. The soft, wounded part of my heart began to harden, to crystallize into something sharp and unyielding. The sadness didn't disappear, but it was joined by a new emotion, an emotion I hadn't truly felt in decades. Rage. It was a clean, cold, clarifying rage. It burned away the fog of grief and shame and left behind a stark, simple truth. They had mistaken my love for weakness. They had mistaken my kindness for stupidity, and they were about to find out how devastatingly wrong they were. When I finally stood up, my legs were stiff, but my spine was made of steel. The vindicated matriarch, a title I never sought, was being forged in the crucible of my son's treachery. I walked into the living room, my expression serene. Jim was off the phone, scrolling through his own device. He looked up, startled.
"Oh, Mom."
"I didn't see you there. I was just in the kitchen," I said, my voice unnaturally calm. "I was thinking, you and Lauren work so hard. You never take a proper vacation. You deserve a real treat." His eyes, so much like his father's, narrowed with a flicker of suspicion, quickly replaced by avarice. "What are you thinking, Mom?" "I want to give you a gift," I said, the words tasting like sweet poison on my tongue. "A trip. A real luxury vacation. First class. 5-star hotel. All expenses paid. How does a weekend nice sound?" On the French Riviera, Lauren walked in just in time to hear the last part, her eyes widening with greedy delight. "Nice," she breathed, her earlier coolness toward me vanishing in an instant. "Oh, Ruth, you shouldn't have." Her protest was so transparent, it was almost comical. "Nonsense," I said, smiling a smile that felt entirely alien on my face. "It's the least I can do. I want you both to be happy." And in that moment, watching their faces light up with undisguised glee, my secret plan began to take shape.
It would not be swift.
It would be meticulous, patient, and utterly devastating. They wanted a lake house built on my pain. I was about to give them an education in consequences that they would never, ever forget. The next few weeks were a blur of secret activity. By day, I was the doting, slightly dotty mother, discussing flight times and hotel amenities with an excitement that matched their own. I let them gush about the boutiques they would visit, the Michelin-starred restaurants they would dine in. I listened to Lauren's detailed plans for the designer clothes she would buy, all with my money, of course. I nodded and smiled, playing the part of the generous matriarch to perfection. They saw me as an open wallet, a means to an end. They had no idea they were speaking to a ghost. The woman they knew, the soft, pliable mother, had died on the kitchen floor that rainy afternoon. By night, I was a different person entirely. I sat at my husband's old oak desk, the glow of the computer screen illuminating my face. Arthur had been a meticulous planner, a man who believed in research and due diligence. I channeled him now, his pragmatism tempering my rage into a sharp, focused instrument. I spent hours on travel websites, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I booked them 2 one-way, first-class tickets to Nice. The expense was considerable, but it felt like an investment in my own liberation. One way. The words themselves were a delicious secret. Then I moved on to the accommodations. I found the most opulent, most photographed hotel on the Promenade d'Anglais, the kind of place Lauren would drool over. I went to their website and used my rudimentary computer skills to copy the images, the logos, the confirmation language. I painstakingly crafted a fake reservation confirmation, a work of art so convincing it could have fooled a professional. I created a detailed itinerary, complete with fake reservation numbers for car services and dinner bookings at restaurants they had mentioned. I printed it all on high-quality paper and placed it in an elegant travel folder. It looked utterly, unimpeachably real. The most crucial part of the plan involved my finances. I called my financial advisor, a kind man who had worked with Arthur for years. I explained, without giving away the emotional details, that I needed to restructure my assets. I moved the bulk of my liquid wealth into a series of trusts and protected accounts, making them virtually untouchable. The monthly payment to Lauren was due in 2 days. I let the date pass. Her call came on the 3rd of the month. "Ruth," she said, her voice tight with annoyance. "The transfer didn't come through. Was there a problem with the bank?" "Oh, dear. Was that today?" I feigned confusion. "I'm so sorry, Lauren. Everything is just chaos with planning your trip. I've had to move some money around to pay for it all. Things are a bit tied up. But don't you worry your pretty little head. It will all be sorted out after you get back from your wonderful vacation." I could almost hear the grinding of her teeth, but she couldn't argue without revealing the nature of our sordid arrangement. She was trapped. "Fine," she clipped out. "Just see that it's handled." My final preparation was a visit to a locksmith. A quiet, efficient man came and changed every single lock on my house, including the gate to the backyard. He handed me a new set of keys, the metal cold and solid in my palm. They felt like a symbol of my reclaimed sovereignty. The day of their departure arrived. I drove them to the airport, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum in my chest. They were giddy with excitement, chattering about the sun and the sea. Lauren barely looked at me, already imagining herself a continental socialite. Jim gave me a perfunctory hug. "Thanks, Mom," he said, his eyes already focused on the check-in counter. "This is really great. You deserve it," I said, and for the first time in months, I was telling the absolute truth. I watched them walk away, their expensive luggage trailing behind them, until they disappeared into the security line. I didn't wait. I turned, walked back to my car, and drove home. The silence that greeted me when I walked through my front door was different. It was not the silence of loneliness or grief. It was the silence of peace. The silence of freedom. I spent the next 2 days in a state of calm anticipation. I called Martha and invited her over. I told her everything. The party, the blackmail, the overheard phone call. Her face, usually so animated, was a stony mask of fury. That vile little shrew, she seethed. And Jim. I could just wring his neck when I told her my plan. A slow, wicked smile spread across her face. Ruth, she said, admiration shining in her eyes. Arthur would be so damn proud of you. Her validation was the final piece of armor I needed. The first call came 36 hours after they had left. It was from Jim. His voice was tight with confusion and irritation. Mom, we're at the hotel. The Hotel Lo Negresco. They're saying they don't have a reservation for us. I injected a note of grandmotherly concern into my voice. Oh, that's impossible, dear. I have the confirmation right here. Are you sure you gave them the right name? I am, right? I heard him speaking French in the background, his accent atrocious. There was a frustrated sigh. Mom, they're adamant. There's nothing. They're completely booked. Everywhere is booked. It's some kind of film festival. Well, that is just terrible service, I clucked sympathetically. Don't you worry. You're resourceful. You'll find something. Just enjoy the beautiful city. I hung up before he could protest further. The next call came 6 hours later from Lauren. The sweetness was gone, replaced by a shrill panic. Ruth, what is going on? We've been dragging our suitcases all over Nice. Every hotel is full or wants €1,000 a night. We can't afford that. And our return flight, the airline says there's no booking for us. They only have a record of a one-way ticket. A one-way ticket? I said, feigning shock. Oh, heavens. That travel agent must have made a terrible mistake. How dreadful. I will have to write a very stern letter. A letter? She shrieked, her voice cracking. We are stranded in France, Ruth. We need you to book us a flight home. And wire us money. Our credit cards are nearly maxed out from trying to find a room. Oh, dear, I said, and this is the part one had rehearsed. I'm afraid that's not possible. As I told you, I had to move everything around to pay for this wonderful trip. All my funds are tied up in long-term investments now. Completely inaccessible for at least 90 days. I'm living on my pension until then. I barely have enough for groceries. A strangled sound came from the other end of the line. It was a sound of pure, impotent fury. You did this on purpose, she hissed. Lauren, what a terrible thing to say. I replied, my voice dripping with wounded innocence. I gave you the trip of a lifetime. I'm sorry it's not to your liking. You are an adult. Jim is an adult. I am quite sure you can figure it out. Goodbye. I ended the call and blocked both their numbers. Martha and I spent the next week enjoying my quiet, peaceful home. We drank tea in the garden, we watched old movies, and we did not answer the phone when it rang from unknown international numbers. We imagined them, the glamorous couple, their carefully constructed facade cracking under the pressure. We imagined them in some cheap, dirty hostel, bickering over their dwindling funds, the designer clothes in their suitcases a mockery of their situation. We imagined them finally having to call one of their fancy friends, begging for a loan to get home. The humiliation would be exquisite. It took them 10 days. 10 days of what I could only imagine was a personal, self-inflicted hell. Martha had a friend who worked for the airline and kept us unofficially updated. They had finally managed to book 2 last-minute seats in economy on a flight with 2 layovers, paid for by a loan from one of Lauren's friends. They would be arriving not in Charleston, but in Atlanta, and would have to take a bus the rest of the way. On the day of their arrival, I prepared. I moved all their belongings, the things they stored in the attic, the boxes in the guest room, out onto the front lawn. It wasn't much, a testament to how little they were truly a part of my life. I arranged the boxes in a neat, orderly pile. Then, I sat in my armchair by the front window, a book in my lap and a fresh pot of tea on the table beside me, and I waited. They arrived just after dusk, stumbling out of a taxi, looking haggard and defeated. Their clothes were rumpled, their faces pale with exhaustion and fury. They looked nothing like the confident, glamorous couple who had left less than 2 weeks before. Lauren marched up the walkway first, her face a thundercloud. She went to put a key in the new lock. It didn't fit. She tried again, rattling it with increasing violence. "What the hell is this?" she screeched, turning to glare at the house as if it had personally betrayed her. Jim, looking utterly broken, saw the boxes on the lawn. His face went slack with disbelief. "Mom," he called out, his voice weak. That was my cue. I calmly placed my bookmark in my novel, stood up, and walked to the front door. I opened it and stepped out onto the porch, closing it firmly behind me. I stood there, looking down at the two of them, the architects of my misery, now looking so small and pathetic on my lawn. "Hello, Jim." "Lauren," I said, my voice even and calm. "It looks like you had a difficult trip. What have you done, you crazy old woman?" Lauren shrieked, all pretense of civility gone. "The locks are changed. Our stuff is on the lawn. What is wrong with you?" I ignored her and looked directly at my son. I looked into his eyes, the eyes that were a pale imitation of his father's, and I let him see the cold, hard truth of what he had become. "I know everything, Jim," I said softly. The color drained from his face. "I was in the kitchen that day. I heard your phone call. The Mommy Fund, the lake house. Your brilliant plan to use my love for you to finance your new life." He flinched, as if I had struck him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out.
He couldn't deny it.
He couldn't lie his way out of this. "You took my home," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. "You took my generosity. You took my love. And you and your wife twisted it into something ugly and transactional.
You humiliated me. You extorted me.
And you laughed about it behind my back. You thought I was a foolish old woman. You thought I was weak." I took a step forward, to the edge of the porch. "The money is gone, secured where you will never touch it. This house, this dusty old mausoleum, is no longer your personal hotel or your bank. Your belongings are on the lawn. I suggest you take them and leave." "You are not welcome here anymore," Lauren sputtered. "You can't do this. We'll sue you. We'll tell everyone you've lost your mind." A small, bitter laugh escaped me. "Tell them what, Lauren? That your elderly mother-in-law stopped giving you a $5,000 monthly allowance that you were blackmailing her for?
Go ahead.
Tell the world. Let's see who they believe has lost their mind." She was silenced. There was nothing she could say. I looked back at Jim one last time. I saw a flicker of the little boy I had loved, a glimmer of terror and regret in his eyes. But it was too little, too late. The damage was done. The trust was not just broken. It had been systematically dismantled and sold for parts. "Goodbye, Jim," I said, and the words held a finality that was as absolute as death. I turned without waiting for a response, walked back into my house, and locked the door. I went back to my armchair and picked up my book. Through the window, I watched them. I watched them argue in frantic whispers. I watched as they loaded their pathetic pile of boxes into the taxi. And I watched as the taxi drove away, its red taillights disappearing into the night, taking the last vestiges of my old life with them. When they were gone, a profound quiet settled over the house. But it was not the lonely, mournful silence I had lived with for so long. It was a new silence. It was clean. It was whole. It was the sound of my own life, finally, blessedly beginning again. The next morning, I went out into my garden for the first time in months. I pulled on my old gloves and sank my hands into the rich, dark earth. The roses needed tending, and for the first time in a very long time, so did I. My life was my own again, purchased at a terrible price, but owned outright, with no one to answer to but myself. I was free. What would you do in this person's place? I often wonder how many others have faced such a quiet, hidden betrayal from those they love most. It's a pain that leaves invisible scars. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Reading your perspectives helps create a community of strength. And if you've ever felt undervalued or manipulated, know that you are not alone. Write me where you heard the story, so we can see how far these messages of empowerment can travel. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Your support allows me to continue sharing these important narratives. There are many other stories waiting for you, each one a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. For those who are able to, using the Super Thanks feature or making a small donation helps keep this channel going and ensures these voices are heard. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.